On October 18th, 10 Chinese and Russian warships crossed the Tsugaru Strait between Honshu and Hokkaido. It's the first time Japan has seen Russian and Chinese warships crossing the strait simultaneously. It has made Japan, and perhaps South Korea, nervous. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force yesterday on October 18th confirmed that 5 Chinese naval ships and 5 Russian naval ships sailed the Tsugaru Strait, moving east towards the Pacific Ocean. It's the first time for Chinese and Russian naval ships to sail the Tsugaru Strait together, as you, the media, have pointed out. The Japanese government has a strong interest in the activities of Chinese and Russian naval ships around Japan. So, we are closely monitoring.
The
narrowest point of the Tsugaru Strait is 19.5 kilometers, but the waters in the middle of the strait are considered public waters. Although Japan's legal territorial sea width is 12 nautical miles or 22 kilometers, Japan set its territorial sea width at 3 nautical miles or 5.6 kilometers by a legal annex, which has allowed World War II U.S. ships to pass through with nuclear weapons without violating Japan's the 3 non-nuclear principles or the pillars of Japan's nuclear policy. As such, the 10 Russian and Chinese ships crossing the Tsugaru Strait do not violate international laws. Chinese official media called the operation a joint Russian-Chinese strategic cruise, which could become a regular occurrence. A few days earlier, China expressed strong condemnation when on October 15th, the US and Canadian warships jointly passed through the Taiwan Strait, which is many times wider than the Tsugaru Strait and is also international waters. I want to reiterate China's unswerving determination to defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Chinese army is always on high alert and resolutely counter all threats and provocations. The US side should change its course and correct its mistakes. The Canadian side should proceed from its own interests and the overall situation of China-Canada relations instead of acting as the cat's paw for the US. China and Japan have long disputed sovereignty over the Senkaku Islands, or the Diaoyu Islands as known in mainland China. Tokyo has also been in territorial dispute with Moscow over the 4 northern islands. China and Russia held joint military exercises in the Sea of Japan between October 14th and 17th before crossing the Tsugaru Strait and heading east to the Pacific Ocean. The Russian-Chinese joint operation seems to fuel, with intention, an arms race in Japan and South Korea. On October 12th, the Liberal Democratic Party, the long-term ruling party in Japan, which will run in the House of Representatives election, proposed in its election platform to double the defense budget from the current 1% of GDP to 2% or more. There is a high probability that Japan will purchase more F-35 stealth fighters, accelerate the construction of large warships, and deploy anti-ship missiles with a range of 1,000 kilometers. China's North Sea fleet entering the East China Sea may be within its striking range. South Korea is developing and building its own submarine by importing technology. Beijing's move is also expected to spawn a South Korean aircraft carrier program, or, as in the case of Japan, the conversion of the 18,800-ton amphibious assault ship to allow F-35 fighters to board. South Korea's medium-range missile development should also accelerate. A Moscow-based newspaper said that the US, Britain, and Australia have just formed a trilateral alliance, AUKUS. The Russian-Chinese maritime military exercise highlighting anti-submarine warfare appears to serve China well, as it intends to draw Russia into a military confrontation with the US and its allies. Many analysts are skeptical about how reliable a partner Russia is to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, although some experts have pointed out that once Russia and China form an alliance, the two countries' military strength will overwhelm that of the US. Yet, more media and analysts consider the diplomatic relationship between China and Russia as a transactional one. Russia has a long land border with China, and the two countries even had armed border conflicts decades ago. Compared to their land forces, the two countries' navies are less guarded against each other. Because of the pandemic, the Russian and Chinese navies didn't hold joint naval exercises in 2020. However, the two sides held joint naval exercises in 2019 in the waters off China. The two navies have also held military exercises in the waters near the South China Sea, but far from the disputed area. This time, the joint exercises were held in a special location, starting in Haishenwai in Ushuri Bay. On October 14th, Chinese state news agency Xinhua reported that the opening ceremony of the joint Russian-Chinese naval exercises was held in the waters off Russia's Peter the Great Bay. The Chinese official media didn't dare to use the Chinese name of the exercise location, i.e. Haishenwai or Ushuri Bay, but used the term Peter the Great Bay instead. Why? Ushuri Bay is the bay where Haishenwai, a natural harbor, is located. The bay is only 15 kilometers from one of China's northeastern provinces. After the victory of the war against Japan in 1945, the then government, now the Taiwan regime, whose president, Jiang Zheshih, sent a representative to Stalin to recover the sovereignty of Dalian, Haishenwai, and other places. After repeated connotations, the former Soviet Union finally agreed to China's reclaiming Dalian and Lushan and reached an agreement that China would reclaim Haishenwai 50 years later. When the Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin was in charge, he signed a border agreement with Russia, officially giving up more than 1 million square kilometers of land. The entire 400,000 square kilometers of land east of the Ushuri River, including Haishenwai, was officially given to Russia. The land size is equivalent to 10 Taiwans, and China's northeast has completely lost access to the Tumen River. Chinese naval vessels will have to bypass the Korean peninsula to reach Haishenwai and Ushuri Bay. Russia renamed Haishenwai as Vladivostok, which means control of the east, and set it up as a major Russian military base in the Far East. Today, Vladivostok, bordered on three sides by the sea, is the largest Russian port and offshore transportation center on the Pacific coast. On October 14th, the Chinese military website published pictures of some of the CCP warships moored in Ushuri Bay, showing that they weren't docked. Likely, the Russian Navy hasn't provided berths for port calls, nor has it provided supplies. The Chinese Communist fleet included one supply ship, which presumably had to supply itself. Perhaps both sides wanted to keep things secretive or intentionally reduce the contact of people and even goods for outbreak prevention. While the CCP sent its newest and largest surface combat ship, Russia only dispatched warships with smaller tonnage and no submarines were seen. It looked like Russia participated with little enthusiasm. Or, Russia's large surface warships are relatively old and may not have been upgraded or maintained in time for the exercises.
这次演习就是为了巩固发展中俄新时代全面战略协作伙伴关系，加强双方战略互信，深化友好务实合作，锤炼部队实战本领，提高两国海军共同应对海上安全威胁，维护地区和平稳定的能力。
Since the breakout of the US-China trade war in 2018, the CCP has occasionally thought of joining Russia against the US as relations have become increasingly tense and the CCP has become increasingly isolated internationally. On June 12, 2019, a reporter asked Putin if Russia would stand by China in the US-China trade war. Putin answered he would watch and see. As a relatively impoverished country, Russia's closer military ties with China could be its price for trade privileges with China. After Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, it faced economic sanctions and isolation from the West and desperately needed foreign capital. 2 months later, Putin and Xi Jinping agreed on a natural gas supply deal worth $400 billion, supplying 38 billion cubic meters per year. In 2019, Russia opened its 5G network to Huawei, saying goodbye to its data security. Meanwhile, instead of buying Russian energy in precious American dollars or euros, Beijing is buying a large portion of Russian energy in its own randomly printed currency, renminbi. This forces Russia or its trading partners to buy goods from China in the future in RMB. Russia's foreign exchange reserves in RMB increased from 5% in 2018 to 14% in 2019. There is also a strong suspicion that the CCP has taken advantage of Russia's economic woes to acquire or steal technology, including aerospace, rocket, and nuclear technology. In 2019, Russia's state-run weapons manufacturing company, Rostec, accused the CCP of widespread theft. The head of Rostec's intellectual property program said, Unauthorized copying of our equipment is a big problem, and there have been 500 such incidents in the last 17 years. Currently, more than 200,000 Russians have died due to COVID-19, and the number of deaths is increasing. On the surface, both China and Russia appear to be isolated by the West, but they aren't on the same path. Following the collapse of Soviet Eastern Europe, Russian leaders have done much reflection on the dark moments in the history of Soviet communism. On October 30th, 2007, the anniversary of the victims of political persecution in Russia, Putin said at a commemorative event, "We are well aware that 1937 was the year when the Great Purge campaign was most rampant, but before that, brutal persecution had been going on for years. Such tragedies occur at a time when ideas that are attractive on the surface but empty in content override the most basic human values of human life, freedom, and rights." On April 5, 2021, Putin signed a new constitution for the Russian Federation. It explicitly identifies faith in God as a core value of Russia, which is fundamentally different from the atheistic CCP. On October 13th, Putin made a rare statement on the Taiwan issue, which drew attention and triggered mixed interpretations.
If China were to invade Taiwan, would you say a real risk of war?
If you were following the People's Republic of China's leadership statements, in one of his latest speeches I attended, it was at an international event, UN event I believe, Chairman Xi Jinping said that the People's Republic of China doesn't plan to use the armed forces for solving any issues. He said that much, I think. As much as I understand the Chinese philosophy, including of state building and management, it's not connected with the use of force. And thirdly, in my opinion, China does not need it, the use of force. China is a great, powerful economy. In purchasing power, adjusted dollars, China has become the first economy in the world, ahead of the US. Building up its economic potential, China is able to reach its national goals, and I do not see any threat here. As for the South China Sea, there are oppositely directed interests, but our position, the Russian Federation's position, is based on the fact that we will need to allow all regional countries, without non-regional states' intervention, to resolve all disputable issues calmly through negotiations, relying on fundamental norms of the international law. In my opinion, there is such opportunity, and it's not played out yet. Putin's statement has received attention because of the recent tensions in the Taiwan Strait, which have been growing. For the first 4 days of October, Chinese military aircraft made a record number of daily incursions into Taiwan's southwestern air defense identification zone. Russia has always advocated a one-China policy. On June 16, 2021, Biden and Putin held a US-Russia summit in Geneva, Switzerland. In response to a question from a US reporter about how Russia would respond if the CCP attacked Taiwan by force, Putin merely smiled and didn't give a definitive answer. Putin's latest statement comes just days after the Russian foreign minister said, "Russia, like a vast majority of countries in the world, considers Taiwan to be part of the People's Republic of China. This will be used as a starting point in our policy." According to a circular issued by the Russian Communist Party, the Putin authorities have launched an ongoing campaign to arrest the Communist Party members since September 2021. This is rather unusual. One explanation is that Putin is aware that the CCP has long been supporting in secret the Russian Communist Party and its attempt to overthrow him, and that it has intensified more recently, so he has made a decision to launch the arrests. Given the personal relationship between the CCP top leader Xi and Putin, it's unlikely to be Xi who has sponsored the overthrow of Putin. Rather, there may be others within the CCP who think and act differently. At a regular press conference on the 14th, the Hong Kong media mentioned that US Pentagon Press Secretary stressed on the 12th that Beijing is increasing its intimidation and oppression of Taiwan and other partners and allies. Chinese spokesman again responded in the standard tone of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Taiwan is China's Taiwan, and it's not the turn of the United States to say anything. However, the Chinese Foreign Ministry explicitly avoided the question when asked by a reporter about Putin's statement on the 13th. Perhaps Chinese officials don't know how to respond to Putin's statement yet. Would they resort to their typical response, such as telling Putin that the Taiwan issue is China's internal affairs and Russia isn't qualified to say anything? Or any foreign country that tries to intervene in Taiwan issue won't have a good outcome.